thank you everyone for attending this packages question time. I'm going to crack straight on with it because we only have an hour and we do have to finish bang on the hour. We are recording, as I've said already. We are hoping to provide as much help as possible. So if you could stay on mute unless you're speaking, that will help. If you would like to contribute, please raise your hand, your Zoom hand. There's the reactions button, I think, to raise your hand, and we shall pass over to you. We are grateful for some people who've posted some questions in advance. Some of them I'm going to ask just to keep things moving quickly. Marcus, just so you know, you're going to be asking your own questions. So when we get to your section of the event, I'll be asking you to come off mute and to ask the questions that you've written up. And if we don't get through everything today, then we have the list of questions and we shall share them in another way. So without further ado, I'm going to start with a question which was posted by Richard Setzman, who I don't think is able to join us, but he was asking questions about sort of the reasoning behind the decisions that have been made for the new back office. And the answer to that really is all in the RFCs. So if we will, I'll make sure to send Richard a link and we'll put it in the links. It's RFC number, I made a note, 23, is it? Who knows? Anyway, we'll put a link to that. So we don't have time to go into the reasonings now. The aim of this meeting is to unblock anyone who's blocked, reassured people they're going in the right direction, and just help people who are working on things right now with the technologies they're going to be using. So a question from Warren, a nice start, which Filip, I will be asking you to answer. When should we expect the first RFC, and will it be on NuGet proper, the public NuGet feed?
RC, I guess.
RC, not
yeah.
What did I say? RFC, sorry.
Yeah. We expect to ship that on time. So for all majors, we ship RCs 6 weeks in advance. So if my math is right, that means 2 weeks from now. I'm sure Jakob will nod to that. That's good.
Yes, April 17.
April 17. And yes, it's going to be NuGet, proper NuGet, not only the MyGet feed. We use those for what we call pre-releases, which are betas and alphas and stuff like that. But for release candidates and real releases, we put them on NuGet.
Will we be getting RCs, as I know they're called, for the commercial packages?
Yes, but probably not at the same time. To be honest, we are also working on all of our packages, and it's going to be a while. We expect to ship. We hope to ship all of them on day 0 of the release. That's still the goal and what we're aiming for. And of course, we want to have RCs for them as well, but they will probably, most likely, or definitely not be 6 weeks early.
Fair enough. They'll be there when they're ready. I'm glad Andy Butland's on the call, so he's nodding along. Yeah. Yeah. And then of course there's the obvious question from Warren about talking about what packages won't be available on day 0. So the big ones from the community, and asking, do we know how that's going with the telemetry data? Do we know what the big packages are, and if people are working on them?
Yeah, so just like with when we did V9 on .NET Core, I mean, packages are pretty central to the value of Umbraco. So it is something that we try to follow up on and follow along with very closely. So we're aiming for, I mean, I think we're looking primarily at like top 20 on the marketplace or something, and like reaching out to those authors on a one-by-one or case-by-case kind of thing, and seeing where we can help and what makes sense and what kind of questions we can answer. And I guess that's kind of also why we're doing this session, right? Like, hopefully we can help some of you. I see some familiar faces in this call, at least, that I know are responsible for some of the top 20 packages. I mean, I know just from Twitter and Discord and everywhere that there's definitely progress on most of the packages that I know of that are pretty widely used. Some of them are longer and closer than others, and probably some of them are not going to be ready for day one. But yeah, I'm pretty hopeful and positive about the situation. To be honest, I was expecting more people at this time to be nowhere, and it seems like there's a lot of people that are actually somewhere. So that's a very precise definition, by the way.
It's a positive answer though, so that's
I think so.
Good. Yeah. And a question again from Warren about how HQ can help with the learning process that there is with the new technology stack. Well, yes, events like this. Thank you to Marcus for suggesting it a couple of days ago. Also, thank you to Marcus. He wrote a blog post which is sharing a lot of the resources that people have been sharing as a result of what they've been learning. We've now consolidated that over on the Umbraco packages repository, so that it's in a place that everyone can help keep up to date. So you can submit PRs if we're missing any links to articles or YouTube videos or source code repositories even, because Nathan has released a preview of the front end assets of the workflow package, so that if you want to see how a big package is organized and structured and the approach that he's taken, I think probably to say, don't worry if you have a simple package, because that's going to look like a lot of work, but then workflow is a big package, right? So you would expect to see a proper architecture in place. But we also have links on that repo, for example, the V14 branch of usync, I think, and contentment, and all the people who are working in public or not, sorry, Lee, working in public on their projects. So if people could check out that page, that would be very helpful. Add anything that we've missed and help keep things up to date. That would be very appreciated. And a question that I don't really want everyone to answer now, because we'll be here for a while, but it is interesting to know how the package community are finding it so far. So I was wondering if the package developers on this call, if you're in the mood, just type some words into the chat as to how you're feeling, if you want to share your thoughts, and then we can share them later. But I would like to now ask Marcus, the man who is the reason we're all here today, because he had questions and you've been working, Marcus, and you want to know if you're doing things right. So please, can I ask you to ask your questions yourself?
Yeah, of course. I joked with you to say that, okay, do we only have 1 hour? What about all the other questions? I figured I'll just answer your little question. Like, I think that my overall impression is that a lot of people is struggling and finding things hard. Now, I've had that same experience myself, like really getting my head around things. But now when I've started to do that, it feels really good. And I said that to someone yesterday, that like, it feels like this is the right decision. And then it's hard to learn new stuff, but when you do it, and then you start feeling really safe about using TypeScript and things, you know when things break, and then that's really valuable. So yeah, I have a lot of questions, both big and small, so I can just get started.
Sorry, Marcus, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah, of course.
I've heard that from a number of people, and I was talking to Bjarke the other day, and his feeling about it and stuff, and Bjarke, randomly ran into Niels Hartvig, the old founder, a few days ago, and he said that it was a lot of the same experience back with when Bell was introduced, that everybody was thinking, what's this new thing I need to learn, and it's hard to get started, and I don't want to learn something new and stuff. So I feel like, yes, there's definitely a learning curve, especially if you see yourself more on the back end side. But I think it's going to be worth it. The more I work with it, the more I hear from people, the more you actually really get the benefits as well.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Now take it away. I'll stop speaking.
So no, it's fine. I mean, it's hard to know if it's just resistance against doing things differently, or if that's the actual idea is not really good. But I think that in this case, it's more like about spending the time to understand it and getting help to understand it as well. So that's good that we can have this meeting. Okay, I have a couple of questions, and some of them might be confusing, but one of them, the first one is here about like the concept of a store, and I think there's other questions around this as well. But the initial question was like, there's something called an item store, and there's also something called a detail store. And they seem to be quite similar if you look at the code. I think I know why, but I'm just wondering if you can elaborate on the differences and why they are different.
Yeah, I guess time for me to start answering. So, I mean, to break down stores that's a rather large concept, and you're asking very specific about item and detail stores.
Yeah.
But I don't think item and detail is just something we call some of our stores, and they map pretty much one-to-one to the management API. So an item store will use item endpoints, detail will use the detail endpoints. So it's a rather difference in models being fetched. You would use items in a tree, you would use details when you click on an item, essentially. But stores in general is, I find, a concept many are hitting their head against a little bit. Now, I mean, stores as a concept isn't really new in any way of front-end frameworks. You would be able to use a lot of different store implementations with Angular, React, Vue. You have, I don't know, different store stuff there. We chose to come up with our own kind of store, which you could say is a way to persist stuff in memory, so we don't have to request it later. And now everything isn't quite wired up yet with what we want to accomplish with this, but it's rather the architecture is now in place for when we query stuff through a repository, it will be stored in a store, but the only API you'll see when querying stuff is the repository. So I believe I actually have an article to share. Let me just see. So if we go to the documentation here, we now what was previously not published as Umbraco backoffice is now available in version 14 on the Umbraco docs. So you can go in and find all the latest backoffice documentation here. And I believe if we go into specifically stores, I would actually like to start with repositories. So a repository, this is really the diagram explaining the relationship between a repository and a store. So you see store up here in the right-hand corner, repository kind of in the middle, and the elements are way down below. So elements is the visual thing you see. That could be a property editor or a dashboard, and that may have a context, but not all of them do. So context is another thing we could also go into. The context, if you have it, or the element directly will query the repository, and the repository will decide where to fetch data from. So most likely it will fetch the data from the server, but it could have a store attached that it could fetch the data from if it already queried the server. We are currently lacking some kind of connection between server and store. So the repositories currently don't know if the data has been fetched yet in most cases, because it's paginated data and you're querying maybe for an ID, and we don't know if we have exactly that page read out into memory. So there's more stuff coming here, but it's important to say this is a concept we're using in the core of the back office. It's not something you have to use nor understand, really. I mean, we have seen package developers already using this concept for their own packages, but I would say it comes down to how complex your packages are. It would be perfectly okay to have a fetch request directly in your element and just show the data from whatever source you have. You could also implement your own store. Sorry, I know there are many lightweight libraries that have a store, and if you chose to use one of those, you could put your own data in there. So this is really the public API of what we ship with the back office kind of ends with the repository. So that's the one you are going to use when you need data that's, you could say, Umbraco branded. So documents or users or members or media, you would use the corresponding repository for that and not have to care about where it fetches the data from. This will in the future allow us to, among others, put on this one the offline mode eventually if we chose to go that route. As I said, we now have the architecture to really plug on additional sources, and not a fourth source could be Signal R. So to figure out if other editors have edited a document you already loaded into memory in your back office client session, Signal R would just tag on to this list and then update the data. So the next time you query the repository, you get the updated data from memory eventually. Yeah. So that's really that's the relationship between repositories and stores, but stores are entirely optional in the source code. Now, but we chose to implement this architecture pattern throughout all the sections in the back office. The old back office, and not to throw it under the bus too much, but it was kind of doing things differently whenever you looked on it. It really depended on the age of the thing. Some of them were nicely laid out with the factories and resources, I think they were called in Angular. Yeah, factory resources and services, and you kind of had more or less the same concept. And others just, call a thing directly in the element, and others then again depended on global variables from the server, as in server variables, and then sort of hook that into either a resource or not at all, just use it directly in the element. So what we're doing now with the backups is aligning everything into this pattern, even though it might be excessive for a lot of use cases. Some of the sections are really small, like the packages section. It's really just a list of packages, but it still uses a repository and a server data source. And so just to stay within the pattern. So wherever you go to look in our source code, you'll find the same pattern. Yeah. So I think that's, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think I understand. When I looked at the source, I got to the conclusion that you said now, that the end of the things that I need to do to be able to build like a tree, for example, is that I need to implement the repository to provide the data, and then you don't really care where the data comes from, right? Yeah,
because then you hook into our system. So if you implement a tree, you want to show it as Umbraco shows a tree. So you need the tree repository. Yeah.
In the scenario where I would mount like a section view and load my own data table, I get that we don't have to understand all of this. But if you want to reuse things like a collection view or a tree or whatever, then that's where it's starting. That's when I started wondering about like what's the difference between an item and a detail. And I understand what you said is that details is like the full-blown object, and an item is more like what used to be called like a slim object in the core, where you get a list of something, right? So I get it makes sense. And
items are paginated as well, usually.
Sorry?
Yeah, I was just saying items are paginated as well, so all the endpoints will be paginated.
Okay,
that's the concept.
Yes, I was just going to jump in and say, like, one of the most notable changes between the old back office and the new one is that now we determine between, or distinguish between, what's the public API and what's our implementation. And the stores is implementation and not API. So we might change a store, we won't change the repository. I mean, that will require a major version and stuff, but that's the distinction that you have to care about as a package developer, is that you can't just play around with our stores and expect things to not be broken. Like, the API contract is the repository.
Okay,
yes,
that's great.
Although we don't hide them too far away. I mean, technically you could request a consumer store and start using the data. And I mean, this is some kind of, I mean, you would see this pattern maybe in a React app, where you put your data in a store in the top component, and then all subcomponents would just query that store. And I mean, that's traditionally you would do it like that. And you can do that in Umbraco as well. So you spin up a store in your top component, put your data in there, and you save on having to put it into props 5 levels deep. But of course, Umbraco also has the context API, which resembles that of React. And that's a way to send data down the stack without putting it in a store. So that's another concept. Not sure if that was also part of the questions, but just wanted to throw it out there. There are a lot of new things, of course, to learn, but I hope they're not too foreign for anyone coming in from, let's say, other libraries, other frameworks, at least as a concept.
Yeah.
But I can't stress that enough, that you have to think about, even though you could hack everything out of AngularJS, and there's still parts you can hack out that you're not supposed to. Those will break. I mean, that's our intention, is to change that so you don't use them.
Okay, I get it. I mean, that's really good, because it hasn't been super clear that the repository is like the contract as well. I haven't heard that before, so it's really good to hear that. I think.
Yeah, correct me if I got it wrong, right?
No, yeah, it's you're right. That is the relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, you want the elements to new up the repository it's going to use.
Yeah.
Also, interestingly, we don't carry instances of the repositories around. We new it up every time we need it in an element. So it's always fresh, because the repository doesn't hold a state. That's really important distinction. A store holds a state, so that goes in the context API. So the repository will actually consume the store through the context API, but that's another detail. And as Filip says, it's really not important to any public API. You just know there is a store behind.
Mm-hmm.
But you can use your own. I mean, you could query a store directly. I mean, depending on needs, like if the context API for some reason didn't fit your needs, you could do a store instead, put your data up there, and then use it. That would maybe be relevant if, let's say, you needed data somewhere else that's not in your immediate stack, in your DOM tree. So you needed some data in a modal, for instance. A store could be more suitable. So there are a few details to. I mean, you have to imagine your app as a huge tree, right? And you can only inherit data from upwards, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's always the global context, or I could mount a context in the host element from the entry point. So I guess that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a global context. Yes, that's mounted on the top level element.
That would be one way to be able to communicate from basically wherever with, I guess. Okay, I think you've answered like more or less some of the questions in one answer, which is great. Just wondering about, like, because the API changed a little bit when you create a manifest. So there's one method called element, and there's another called JS.
Yeah.
I think they work the same. It looks like that, but I don't understand the difference. So maybe if you can explain. And
I mean, for elements, they are the same, and you should use the element one there to indicate that it is an element you want to load up. But JS works. I mean, we have other manifests that implements an API, and it would do that through the JS. So that's as in it'll load a JavaScript module that's not an element. So the distinction isn't quite there. I mean, JS works for everything. Elements work for only elements. And we used to have only the JS one. So I'm sure we'll put out more documentation on the exact differences in the Umbraco docs. I know we also need to update our own examples. I believe in the tutorials we still use the JS one.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just confusing to understand when to use which, because both works. So I mean, some of these ones I guessed the answers already, but I just want to get them out there to hear them.
Yeah, there's also the one called element name. I've heard that a few times. What is that? And that's really if your module doesn't default export the element. We don't know what kind of element you actually want to spin up. We just know you want to load a file. So that's a way to say, load this file and spin up exactly this element. So there's a trick to that as well. Like your file could be a whole bundle of all your elements at once, but you only want to spin up one of them. So there are a few tools to use. You don't need to use all of them.
Yeah, makes sense. One thing that like when I'm building my package now, I use custom variables, the CSS variables, where I basically pass forward the ones that you have in the core, but I wanted to just include a style file, and I didn't really find a good way to do it. Right now, I'm adding a link element to the header from my enter point, but I'm just thinking maybe if there is a way, or if there's some extension point missing, maybe.
I mean, we chose not to build an extension point there. I mean, maybe not deliberately, but we can't really build an extension point to it, because that's something that needs to go in the head or the body section, and that's by default supported by JavaScript. So you are on the right track by doing it in an entry point. I think you also wrote in your question. So load up an entry point and just create a link tag there. That's actually fine. But I would say if you use a bundle on top of that, this such as v, you can just import the CSS file in the top of your bundle, of your index file, and it will land up in.
It creates the file, but it doesn't include it, right?
That depends on your v configuration. If it's small enough, it'll just inline it. Yeah, there's something about assets, and you can adjust the size of when it does what. I've seen it inline font files as well. They are rather big. It's not something you want to have inline, but you need sometimes to adjust it a little bit.
I mean, for me, when I include and when I import the CSS file, it will be outputted in the dist folder, but it won't be included in the back office without me manually like adding the link element. But I guess there's ways to do it.
Yeah,
just wanted to raise this because I think it's good practice to add the variables and then.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We should have a way to document.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely build a helper method that just adds a link to your script.
I mean, for me, it's fine. It doesn't matter. I'm not sure if it's going to be a big thing, but I think I just wanted to ask the question to see if I'm on the right track and also make you aware of it, because I guess other people might want to have variables. Some might just reuse what you have. So I don't know. But I got the answer that I wanted, I think.
Cool.
It's not hard to add the element. So I mean, not a big issue.
In this way, you are in control of what goes into, you could say, the global scope. So if you add variables, others can override those variables. But otherwise, for your element styles, if you're using lit, of course, you just use the static styles property of the lit element. So this would only be for global variables.
Yeah, that's what I'm like setting up, like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 variables and then reusing them, because like you said, it's hard. For example, if I want to use them in a modal, the modal is mounted quite high up in the tree, so I can't really, really know. And I have views that's in a custom section and other views are in the content section, but they still need access to those colors. So that's why I think I needed, or I need the global variables. I need them to be quite global, I guess.
We've had the discussion a few times, like what parts of what you can do with JavaScript should we try to make easier for you? Because we don't want to rebuild just a web framework. There's lots of, frameworks out there for it, but it's a trade-off. Like we've built some utils here and there that's just JavaScript utilities, and maybe there should be one for this, and maybe there shouldn't. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually. I mean, you offered to build an extension point for it. I don't know if it's needed, but maybe just some words in the docs in the future that this is how you would do it if you need to. Most of the time, maybe you don't need to. I guess if you don't have any custom colors that you have to show, then it doesn't matter. But for me, it's like some colors for different states that's really not easy to reuse the colors that's already defined. But I guess it would be quite rare for most of the other packages that I have. I guess I wouldn't need it. Yeah.
I mean, we could also technically add back the style sheets array we had in the old manifest files, if that turned out to be helpful to people. But we'd rather you control it yourself in your package.
Maybe it's just giving people ideas about how to hack things. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, every time we do a helper function or something in the manifest, we have to support the API of that. So if we want to do style sheets, I mean, before you could only put in the URL to the style sheet. But what if you needed cross-origin anonymous, or you needed to defer it, or you needed to do some other stuff? The old backups didn't support that. You'd have to do it manually anyway. So we thought, okay, let's just, I mean,
I think it
you
makes
can do
sense.
it what you want.
I get the reasoning, and it's also probably quite rare that someone really need a custom style sheet, I think.
But we just added import map to the manifest file. And that, I find that really interesting, because we needed it, right, for the core, but others can now also use it because it's in a manifest file.
Yeah.
And that's because you can only have one of them on the page, and it needs to be the first script tag on the page. So whenever you have loaded your first JavaScript file, you can't really import any, you can't create an import map, because it's still depending on what the browsers would do. If the import map changes, it would basically need to reload all its modules, right? Because you could change the paths. So the browsers don't support it. That's why we have it in a manifest file. So we actually go out and say, okay, we'll support the API as it is. It will use, scripts and scopes, whatever there is on the public API at the moment. And if that changes, we'll have to follow along. But simply because we can only have one of them. So, and we needed it to work. Yeah. But that's where we went in and said, okay, we need to do this.
Yeah, it makes sense.
How are you doing, Marcus? I haven't been keeping track of how far through your questions you've got.
I think I'm at question 3.
Of 27. No, don't worry.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
Yeah, no, keep going. This is good stuff. Thank you.
I mean, if anyone else has questions, you're allowed to jump in. I have more questions. I can talk forever. So
no, I think if you just keep going for another 5 or so minutes, and then we'll pass it on.
Yeah. Okay. I one thing that I've felt like a pain with, and I think maybe it's because being a beginner here, but when and also maybe the lack of documentation, but I started to create a section view. I tried the workspace view, and I also played with the collection view. But when things don't work, especially when you have like a routed modal inside a section or something, it's really hard to understand why, and to understand, did my route get registered? First of all, is there a way to see this, to debug this? And if it's not, could we create something that would output like the current state of the routing in some way? I know the routing is nested, but yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, debugging, first of all, is hard in this regard, because routing is really set on the router slot, and you can have many of those, many levels deep. So, and they keep appending to the route, right? And a modal route is no different. It also just registers itself relative to the router slot it's inside. That's also coincidentally why you can't do modal routes in an entity action, for instance, because you don't have the context of where you are. You can't say, well, when you right-click a document and click sort, it opens a modal, right? But there's no route to that because it's outside of any context. So because of that, debugging is a bit hard. I mean, we do control the router slot, so I'm sure we could come up with a way to kind of figure out what the routes are. I mean, we already did so for the context, so you can now put in the UMB debug element to figure out what contexts are available in your in the spot that you put the element in, because it's really depending on, again, the DOM tree here. So put that element in, you can see that we could do something similar for routes, I'm sure. You give it a pointer and it could tell you what routes are available at that point. But of course, modal routes become then another point that's hard to figure out, because they're not registered as such. No, I mean, only when they spin up. But yeah,
I understood that this might be hard. I wanted to raise the question, but I think that when you start to mount something, you start with the section view, and then if you would see like what's available at the not the top level, then you would say, oh, I'm missing that view, and then when you got that working, you go to the model, you know, so I don't know if it's possible. I wanted to ask, and I wanted to say that this is one of the things that I've been spending most of the time on, like figuring out the views and figuring out the routes and getting actual my element to show up. I figured that this might be something that's valuable.
It's really valuable input, and I agree we need to do more in this space. We don't have any debugging tools at the moment. For routes.
It's been quite hard, and then especially also maybe now when I think I figured out how the views are routed, that's easier, because in the beginning it's just trying to guess based on the other parts of the back office. I have another thing about trees. I'm not sure if there's looks like the route to, if you have something in the tree, an item in the tree, that the route is hard-coded. I'm not sure if that's something that you intend to change, but today it's like routed to workspace/entity/edit. And let's say that I want to have something in the tree that's only showing something. I don't want to use the edit route. Is this something that you intended?
As in something in the tree you can't click on, or do you mean you go directly to
I mean, if I show up, if I use the current tree, tree, and I provide a repository, and I send a unique ID to something, the route that's outputted would basically be hard-coded. It's hard-coded somewhere in a context I don't remember, but it's always going to be section/workspace/edit, like entity type/ID/edit, something like that. I don't know exactly, but I interpreted that as I couldn't change the route. I couldn't point it to something else for my custom tree, and I'm just wondering if it's intentional, or if this is something that maybe we should look closer at and making sure that we can extend it and route a click from the tree to whatever route I want to, basically.
I think this is a good case of where, I mean, we build it to our needs, and then people are coming in with their own needs, and we need to know about that, essentially. Figure out what to do. So again, really valuable input that you need other routes. I mean, I would love to see to hear about the use case for it. What we've done previously, we don't want to show everything in a tree. We just show like the top node languages, for instance. We don't want to show the whole languages in the tree because they are paginated, and it's kind of hard to do. So we put in a point there that will then open up a workspace view where you can do whatever you want in that view. I mean, that's, but for tree, for the items in a tree, I can definitely see.
For me, I used, this is like the concrete example is for the email package that I have, and I introduced something that I call workspaces before the new back office was released, but so it's going to be, I never really talk about it loud with like clients, but it's basically tenants. So if you have one tenant, then you have like a list of your campaigns. But if you have multiple tenants, then you can click on the tenant itself to see like a dashboard about that specific tenant with it. And that's basically an overview. So for me, I could use the edit route. It could say edit, but it would be nice if it said overview. So it's probably not a big thing, but it would make the tree more flexible if it would be possible to override the route for writing. I'll create an issue to explain it more, and then we can talk about to see if it's possible to make it.
Yeah, definitely do that.
Great. Lotte, how long do you want me to keep going?
Shall I give you a break, and I'll ask another Richard Sutton question, so you can at least have a glass of water, Marcus. Jacob doesn't get a break. One of the questions that Richard had was talking about the lack of out-of-the-box model view binding. Let me get the right terminology. If you're updating a model in your front end, we're used to AngularJS, perhaps we're used to Vue, whatever, where you can just bind a text box to a property and you don't have to think about it. That doesn't exist in the new front end like that, does it? Is that right?
That is absolutely right. And how lucky we are, it doesn't exist anymore. I would say. I mean, it
Just
has.
I'm curious, why are we lucky, Jake?
It had its use cases, of course. I think the example here Richard had was that he had a rather large model that was bound to a lot of input fields and just needed the values to update. But I think that the thing, I mean, not having to think about it in AngularJS is where things went wrong or could go awry, because you didn't know when they updated. So they kind of put in that, I think it was called ng model update or ng model change callback you could then do whenever anything changed. But that didn't work for deep objects either. So not to go too deep into like pitfalls here of AngularJS, but in JavaScript, which is, I mean, we don't have a framework anymore that can do these magic kind of things. So we're using lit, and you could choose to use lit as well, or use something else that had model binding if you wanted to, like Vue or React. Actually, I'm not sure React has it, but what you could do in lit, for instance, is you put it in a form, and then you do a form submit on that. And what you get in the event is then you can construct a form data object based on that, and you can map that back into your models. And that's how you would do it in JavaScript. So that's the distinction here, is to remember we are in JavaScript now. We don't have a framework. But you could, if you found a form framework that could do that, I mean, you can use it. And I believe even, as I saw on Discord, there was this discussion about it as well, where lit themselves might be looking into some kind of form library. And that could maybe help you doing that. But in reality, do a form submit, you can construct a form data based on your form, and you have all the values there. But of course, you need to map them back into your model. There's no magic two-way binding.
Yeah, the point is really, again, that the API is just the JavaScript and your element, and then you decide whatever is in there. And you can run React or Vue or anything. Technically, you run AngularJS, but please don't. Yeah, it's not really our concern what you do inside of your element. We solve it with lit. We think that's a good solution. You could probably do the same. That might be good for you. It might not. That's your decision. We don't want to force that on you, and we don't want that. We're very cautious that lit is not our API. Like, if you like, I mean, we almost want to change lit sometimes just because we don't want people to use our lit. Like, they can bring their own lit if they want to, so they don't depend on ours.
Yeah, but there is, I mean, we ended up exporting our version of lit so people can hook onto that, despite everything, just to say our components don't use anything magical that you can't use. But yeah, absolutely, go and bring your own library if you want any of that. I mean, there are nice libraries out there. And I think we'll find that for other things, the old back office had, not just in AngularJS, but we had other libraries attached to Angular, sort of. I mean, there was a way to build charts, for instance. There was a way to do color picking and the color spectrum thing there. And you had other stuff attached to it. And now we have the UI library with a lot of awesome stuff that you can use. And you can put in your own stuff, and that really brings down the assets we have to ship along with the back office, because we don't know what you'll use, and you shouldn't probably depend too much on what we use. So we try to wrap everything. Sorry.
No, that's good. I was going to say no one else has currently raised their hand, so I can give the microphone back to you, Marcus, if you have more to ask.
To my long list of questions. I can add on to what you said about, like, when I started to work with other frameworks, my first experience with like JavaScript was with AngularJS and the two-way binding, and I've understood like the challenges with that. But initially, you thought that you really needed to have two-way binding in the form, but then, like you said, Jacob, like, what you're really interested in is actually the data that's submitted. So maybe you don't need two-way data binding, and especially if the elements themselves can perform the validation, then you don't really need it at all most of the time. Like you said, there are some, I've looked at it and they've tried to convince like the lit team to create a two-way data binding thing, but they're really trying to avoid it. It feels like they're trying to be polite, but then basically doing nothing. But there's some initiatives around it. So there's libraries to do it, like lit extensions. If people want to look at it, there's a couple of issues in there.
I mean, if you look at AngularJS, they even ended up saying that you shouldn't use two-way binding. You should do data down, events up, essentially. And that saves a ton of listeners. Like, just go to your performance tab in Chrome and run and see how many listeners are there in an AngularJS app, because of all everything scope.watch and two-way binding, and they all create listeners. They all need to, keep comparing objects, and that's really heavy. And your browser will run out of memory.
Like a challenge here, and something that I'm not sure if I'm speaking for everyone, but I think I know I'm speaking for some people, is that they're just trying to solve their problem. They're not really interested in why it's better to not have two-way data binding. They're used to it, and they just want to solve their problem and make something work. So I think that's maybe it's a problem with that. We don't have like good documentation or examples, because I don't think that this would have been an issue if there was a good example of how to just submit the form. That's what I think.
No, you're right. Absolutely. There are a lot of nice APIs in modern JavaScript that you need to learn about.
Yeah, I love it. I've learned so much from just working with this and looking at what you've done, and I feel that I've become a lot better developer over the last 6 months just by learning about this. So I find it really, really fun. Some developers don't want to learn everything, but they just want to solve their issue and don't really want to understand all the deep dive stuff. So I get it. I get that as well.
I'm really happy you're saying that. It makes me so happy.
Personally, for me, it's been really fun, and sometimes challenging as well. But that's how it is. I still have a couple of questions. I have one I've been thinking about. I haven't really got my head around, and that's, we talked about the entry point as a way to, bootstrap a package. But I've noticed that you're using bundles in like a bundle and extension point, and I'm wondering what's the difference and when to choose which one of these ones.
Yeah, I think bundle is just a way to load things automatically for you, as in load several packages at once. So it's not really a tool that you need to use as such. It sort of combines other APIs into ones and lets you load things quicker. I mean, you still need to build an entry point if you want to execute code upfront. So bundle is something to load stuff with, and the entry point is one of the manifests you can register. But technically, because it's all JavaScript, with entry points you can load whatever you want as well, because what we give you in the entry point is the host element and the extension registry, right? And you'll most likely just have one list of extensions you need to load.
Mm-hmm.
So you do that in an entry point, and that's what you should do.
So I don't really need to bother
no.
with bundles.
No, I wouldn't say. Could be use cases, but no, not from the get-go.
Okay. I have one more question, but I think I know the answer to that question.
I could just mention that for entry points, when I started toying with it, I expected, we did a lot of work into making the schemas work for these manifest files. So converting all the TypeScript types into JSON schema, so you have nice intelligence when you start registering stuff in the Umbraco package JSON file. But what I found when I build stuff is actually I only register an entry point, and then I do everything in there instead. Because I have nicer typings, I can import stuff dynamically. I can, do class APIs as well, which of course wouldn't be really possible to do in a JSON way. So it's just, it turns out to be much nicer than we initially thought it would be. We thought it would be, you need to execute some code up front, maybe hit the host element, and that's it, and the rest will be extensions. And but you still needed a way to register things dynamically.
So now you can do that with an entry point. You could pull in the current user and register stuff if the current user is someone specific, or if it's a specific day. I believe I had in one of my demos. So only on Mondays you'll see a dashboard and stuff like that. But of course, we also now have conditions for extensions. So conditions is another way to conditionally register things. You could make a Monday condition, or you could make a current user something condition. Current user is admin condition, for instance. That would be possible to make in both ways. So yeah,
I wanted to say about what you talk about here, because that's also something that I've been a little bit confused about, and I also think that that's going to be a challenge for documentation, that we have those two different ways of doing it. But I found myself only adding an entry point and then doing everything in TypeScript. I guess there's scenarios where you maybe want to use the Umbraco JSON file, but I think I want the documentation to be more about registering stuff from TypeScript, or maybe there should be like a toggle or something that you can toggle between, like it's how it's with different languages. Sometimes you can switch between JavaScript and TypeScript or whatever.
That's a good idea.
Just to make it clear, but it also feels like you're going to spend a lot of time explaining the Umbraco JSON thing when almost nobody's going to use it.
Well, I wouldn't say nobody.
That's my input. I'm not saying that I'm right, but it feels like that.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases when you're doing a package that only has one element, you might do it from your package JSON file, and there is a lot of those if you look in the marketplace. But yeah, for sure, when you start building a quote unquote real application, then you'll probably see yourself going for the programmatic approach.
Yeah, maybe there's for property editors and dashboards, something like that. I guess. Yeah, I'm not saying that nobody's going to use it, but I'm just found myself rarely touching the Umbraco JSON file, and same thing for most of the examples out there.
Yeah, and you also find out quickly you have to restart the whole server if you change that file. So, so get the entry point going, and you can start building stuff really rapid there.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, if you just need to build a property editor and you need some localizations, you can do all of that directly in the JSON file. That would do it there instead of doing the entry point as well. I mean, it is extra overhead to load the entry point, but not much, of course. It is extra overhead to load the entry point and then register stuff there. If you do it in the JSON file, it will be loaded when it's needed.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that options is bad. It's great. I'm just seeing scenarios where it's like a lot of work to maintain those two concepts and document both of them, so that's why I'm trying.
Yeah.
Raising the question and sharing what I've experienced so far.
A lot of it has come to life because it was possible. All of a sudden, not because we thought of it from the start, but because it turns out it was possible. So we added the option, and sometimes we might have gone a little overboard as well. I mean, it's really hard to limit yourself at times but I mean, we've been trying to build this whole thing as extensions. So everything that you see in the back office are extensions. You could build the same thing yourself. You could deregister all of ours and register your own in theory. And so we built the tools we needed because then we thought others need them as well. But as you say, okay, you have stores and everything, and of course it goes a little, there are a lot of concepts to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I got a lot of answers. I can come up with more questions if you want. Do you have other questions, Lottie, from someone else?
Well, we've only got 4 minutes left, and we had a general question really from Carl about just getting started for the new modern front-end technology. And this is me putting a call out. There is now this page on the Umbraco packages repository where we're trying to collate things. So a section on if you want to learn about the new technology in general, here are some resources. Marcus has recommended a video to watch there, which Richard has endorsed as being very good. So if you have any other places, good places for people to jump off on their learning journey, then please share them there. And Umbraco specific stuff's being shared there. A link to this video will be shared there. I think a big thank you, because I'm going to try and finish early so Jacob can go and be a good father. A big thank you to Jacob and Filip for answering the questions, and for everyone who asked the questions. I will try and get this documented, so there's lots of good stuff in the chat. We'll try and share that as well afterwards. I have one final question, I think, for Filip, perhaps, which is from Richard, which was, let's fast forward to when V14 is all done, all the packages are working, wonderful. V15, how much is going to change in V15? He's specifically asking in terms of the TypeScript implementation, but
I think you should count on 14 to 15 and beyond that to be similar to 10 to 11 or 11 to 12 or something like that. So small changes here and there. And of course, I mean, this is, there is some new stuff, and there's definitely things we'll get wrong that we'll need to fix. So there might be a few more breaking changes than normal, but we'll minimize them and deprecate them in time and do like we always do. So I would expect upgrades to be relatively easy.
Yeah, and of course .NET 9 is on the table for 15. So when we do a .NET upgrade, we try to limit it a bit. Yeah, but
so 10 years ago we learned Bell, and now we're learning Bellissima, and in another 10 years, who knows?
well, now we're native, right? We're native with the browser.
So we're never changing again. Wonderful.
Well, we might switch out lit at some point when that dies, or who knows, it goes into
But
the
that shouldn't matter
browser,
for the
or
API.
Yeah.
it shouldn't matter, no.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Do you want to wave?
Thank you very much for all your answers.
Great questions.